Jayo Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jayo Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Vajracharya Statiri Krishna Divine Grace A.C. Bhagavatam Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Grantaraj Sriman Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Go Premanandi. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 5th canto, chapter 7. Sorry. 5th canto, chapter 13. Text number 5. Adrishya Jili Svana Karna Shula Luka Vagbir Vyatitantaratma Apunya Vrikshan Shayate Shuddardito Marichi Toyani Abhidavati Kvachit Ajishya Jila Swarnakarna Shula Ulukavagbir Vyatitan Tantaratma Apunya Vrikshan Shayatek Shuddadito Marichito Yanya Bidavati Kvachit Ajishya Jili Svanakarna Shula Ulukavagdir Vyatitantaratma Punya Vrikshan Shayatek Shuddardito Marichito Yani Abhidavati Kvachit. Manaji? Adrishya, invisible. Jili, of crickets or a kind of bee. Svana, by the sounds. Karnashula, whose ears are disturbed. Uluka, of the owls. Vagbi, by sound vibrations. Vyatita, very disturbed. Antatma, whose mind and heart. Apunya vrikshan, impious trees that have no fruits or flowers. Shayate, he takes shelter of. Kshudha, from hunger. Arditaha, suffering. Marichitayani, the waters of a mirage in the desert. Abhidavati, he runs after. Kvachit, sometimes. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. Wandering the forest of the material world, the conditioned soul sometimes hears an invisible cricket making harsh sounds, and his ears become very much aggrieved. Sometimes his heart is pained by the sounds of owls, which are just like the harsh words of his enemies. Sometimes he takes shelter of a tree that has no fruits or flowers. He approaches such a tree due to his strong appetite, and thus he suffers. He would like to acquire water, but he is simply illusioned by a mirage, and he runs after it. Report. In Srimad Bhagavatam it is said that the Bhagavat philosophy is meant for people who are completely free from envy, paramo nirmatsaranam. The material world is full of envious people. Even within one's inner circle there is such backbiting. And this is compared to the sound vibration of a cricket in the forest. One cannot see the cricket, but one hears its sounds and thus becomes aggrieved. When one takes to Krishna consciousness, one always hears unpalatable words from relatives. This is the nature of the material world. One cannot avoid mental distress due to the backbiting of envious people. Being very much aggrieved, sometimes one goes to a sinful person for help, but he has no means to help because he has no intelligence. Thus the living entity is disappointed. This is like running after a mirage in the desert in an effort to find water. Such activities do not produce any tangible results. Due to being directed by the illusory energy, the conditioned soul suffers in so many ways. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripasindhavyeva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. It's interesting, Prabhupada is beginning the purport by saying that, quoting the second verse in the Bhagavatam, that the Bhagavata's philosophy is meant for people who are completely free from envy. It's a pretty extreme statement. Who is completely free from envy? Anybody here? So does that mean that it's not for us? It's meant for us also. And it's certainly meant for those who are completely free from envy. It's actually meant for everybody, but those who can understand it, and those who are at least free enough from pride that we can begin hearing in the proper way this philosophy. It's explained in the 15th chapter of the Gita, the 5th verse, how Prabhupada talks about pride a lot in the purport there. And it's explained it's not possible to surrender to Krishna if one is filled with false prestige. So that's the first criteria. To be able to hear, we need to be sufficiently endowed with humility, just enough at least, to be able to accept that we need to hear, and then to be able to understand this philosophy. So, if we're a little bit free from envy, then we understand this is our book. And we know whenever we want to surrender, whenever we feel like dedicating ourselves, we pick up the Srimad Bhagavatam or one of Prabhupada's books. If we're desirous of some sense gratification, this book doesn't have much value for us. It is seen as something that would perhaps be a waste of time. So it's a nice judge to see how we're advancing in spiritual life, how attracted we are to hearing, and how unattracted we're becoming to sex desire. These are two ways that we can understand how we're advancing. On one hand, freedom from sex desire, on the other hand, attraction for hearing. Then Prabhupada goes on to explain the material world is full of envious people. Even within one's inner circle, there is much backbiting. And this is compared to the sound vibration of a cricket in the forest. One cannot see the cricket, but one hears its sounds and thus becomes aggrieved. Did you ever try to look for a cricket in the forest? You hear the sound, you try to look where it's coming from. I've done that. Anyone here? You can't find it. You don't know where it is. So it's like that. They're called hidden enemies. So you hear what's going on, but you don't know where it's coming from. Perhaps you hear a rumor. You try to trace it down to its source. It's impossible. Those who are expert at spreading rumors are expert at concealing where it came from. So, due to envy, we're always in situations like that, where we're being criticized. I was reading a quote from Prabhupada. I'm not sure if I have it here now. Yeah. I was reading a quote from Prabhupada this morning because I wanted to refresh my memory a little bit. And he was saying something very interesting, how this is in the purport to 1.12.23. Any responsible executive agent at the top of administration has to tolerate different types of onslaughts from the very persons for whom he works. So Prabhupada is talking here about the inner circle of envious people. And then he gives an interesting example. I don't know if you remember reading this. Then he gives the example of the gopis. He says, Brahma was criticized even by the gopis, the highest perfectional devotees of the Lord. The gopis were dissatisfied with the work of Brahma because, does anyone remember? Right. Created eyes that blink. Does that ever disturb you at all? When you have to blink? When you're so absorbed in seeing something, that every fraction of a second is so relishable and important that when you have to blink, you get frustrated. Krishna's like that. He's so attractive that you can't bear not seeing him for a fraction of a second when you're on this platform. So the gopis are very frustrated with Lord Brahma. So, so he created eyelids, which Prabhupada says here, eyelids which obstructed their seeing Lord Krishna. Eyelids, why? Because they had to go down every once in a while. The only time that disturbs me is when I'm driving and I have to sneeze. At least when I sneeze, I have to close my eyes for a second. It's a little dangerous. But that's something different. But I can relate to that. So then Prabhupada goes on to say, so what to speak of others who are naturally very critical of every action of a responsible man. So that's the perverted reflection, what happens in this material world. So the gopis are critical in the most loving way, and unfortunately we become critical in a way that's not so loving. And Prabhupada is saying any responsible executive agent, if you've ever been in charge of something, that's one of the difficulties of being in charge, because naturally you get criticized. It's impossible for us to satisfy everyone due to our own natures perhaps, and due to the natures of those that we're trying to please. So you're definitely going to be criticized. And in Kali Yuga, the more prominent one is, the more envious people become, and so the more one is criticized. So how do we deal with that? It's explained that in one sense, criticism is worse than envy in the sense that envy you keep inside. Criticism is when it comes out. So it's more destructive. And it's explained that it pierces the heart. Very, very painful. It pierces the heart. So how do we deal with that? We have to deal with it. It's not that we don't accept responsibility. We have to. And this is a way that we become purified. Just like any temple president or anyone that's been in charge of anything has to deal with this all the time. And it enables us to become more enthused, to become situated off the bottom of the platform. You heard the story of the donkey in India? Very famous donkey. You've heard about him? He usually donkeys are pretty ornery. Mules, stubborn, ornery. This one donkey was always very positive. Right? Do you know the story? Always very positive about everything. It was such a phenomena that he became famous in the whole area for always going like this, because donkeys never do that. Never heard about it? Yeah. So one day the villagers decided to have a competition of who could get the donkey to go like this. So everybody lined up. First person went, whispered into the donkey's ear. No, I'm sorry. Smiling like anything. Second person whispered into the donkey's ear. Smiling like anything. Third person, fourth person, fifth person, 100 people. Finally, one person came up to the donkey and whispered into his ear. And then he went. Whispered into his ear again. So he won the prize, Mahaprasadam. So everybody was wondering, what did you say to the donkey? What did you tell him? Tell us. He said it was easy. I just asked him if he wanted to be an ISKCON temple president. So in this way, and it's so purifying. It's so difficult to hear criticism because, especially for devotees, they're trying so hard to serve the others. And in a situation like that, I was thinking the other day, it's like it's nice to hear praise. Why does someone in a position of responsibility, serving others, like to hear praise? What's a good reason why a person like that would want to hear praise? Right. You want to please the devotees, right? So if you hear that they're being pleased, you feel good because you think, okay, well, my energy is being utilized properly. Of course, we always want to improve. We always want to do better. But it's nice to hear that we're satisfying the devotees because that's what we live for. We want to do that. Not out of false ego, but it has great utility to hear that because otherwise you don't know, right? Of course, if you're a cook, nobody says anything, then you know they're satisfied, right? When they complain, then you know they're not satisfied. If they don't say anything, that happens sometimes. You just sort of take it for granted that it's going to taste good and you forget who's doing it, where it's coming from, and so. Although the devotees yesterday were very appreciative of your cooking and they said it a number of times. So that's nice to have an atmosphere like that of appreciation. And if we take it in the right way, then it's very, very helpful. So then Prabhupada, this purport is very interesting because every sentence, every line that Prabhupada is writing, we can relate to. We have experience of this. Then he says, when one takes to Krishna consciousness, one always hears unpalatable words from relatives. This is the nature of the world. One cannot avoid mental distress due to the backbiting of envious people. Being very much aggrieved, sometimes one goes to a sinful person for help, but he has no means to help because he has no intelligence. Just the other day in Vancouver, a devotee was in so much distress because his parents were very much opposed to Krishna consciousness. Very, very difficult for a young person who grows up depending on the love and the affection of his or her parents, and then they become very much disturbed and they begin withdrawing their affection because of someone who wants to become a devotee or is becoming a devotee. This really, it hurts the devotees I've seen. They become very much bewildered by this. And then his parents wanted him to go to a psychiatrist, or at least the family priest. Exactly what Prabhupada is saying here. But they didn't want to do that because they didn't have any faith in the intelligence of the priest or any psychiatrist in the material world who has bodily conception of life. So that's what Prabhupada is explaining here. And undoubtedly, Prabhupada was experiencing, was hearing from the devotees their unfortunate experiences with their parents. Otherwise, Prabhupada wouldn't have written this. Although there's also a story of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who would hide the brahmacharis under the bed in the ashram or under something in the ashram when the parents came. And he would have everybody deny that brahmachari was there. So Prabhupada has experience of that also with his own spiritual master, and the math that his spiritual master was in charge of. So, and he also mentioned, I forget where, regarding Narada Muni, how he was cursed by Daksha, and Prabhupada said similarly, because Narada Muni was preaching to his sons, and Prabhupada said similarly, I have inherited this curse. And I cannot stay in one place very long. Did he say, I'm transferring this curse, I think, to my sannyasi disciples as well? So Prabhupada is very familiar. This is history, that the attached parents don't want their children to take the spiritual life. What to speak of the example of Hiranyakasipu and Prahlad. So these things are going on. And I always try to help the devotees understand that when they take the Krishna consciousness and their parents are very much opposed and they're espousing some materialistic philosophy, in reality you become the father or the mother of your parents when they're speaking like that. Because you really have an understanding. They're like the children. They're acting like the children. It's not that you tell them that, but because this is a whole seminar, how to deal with one's parents. And young devotees always make that mistake. They become too enthusiastic about espousing the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. And of course their parents become very defensive. You can't tell a person that your whole life is completely useless. You just can't tell a person speak to a person like that. They have to realize it on their own. It's a very difficult thing for us to realize that we've wasted so much time. But it's enough for them just to see by the example of their children or their story. It's enough to make them feel very threatened and question their existence, what they've been doing, what they haven't been doing. And ultimately they benefit. Most parents, they benefit greatly from, well, we know that they do. Generation upon generation benefits when one becomes a devotee. But they also benefit in this life. I've seen it so many times, how they begin really appreciating the fact that their devotee, their son has become, or daughter has become a devotee. Being very much aggrieved, sometimes one goes to a sinful person for help, but he has no means to help because he has no intelligence. Of course, the people don't realize that. The people who are getting harassed by others don't realize so many people are seeing psychiatrists and psychologists. They're reading self-help books, or everyone is always trying to become free from their distress. They're taking pills, so many things. It's an epidemic in society, so much. And from mental disease, you get physical disease. At least 2/3 of all physical diseases begin here. And so people they don't know who to go to. They don't know what doctors to go to either, right? I read years ago that there was a doctor strike in England, in London. And what happened to the death rate during the doctor's strike? It went down. Why is that? Even Prabhupada didn't want to go to hospitals or see Western doctors. Sometimes you have to. But these are authorities, doctors, scientists, they're authorities, but are they actually helping? They don't know anything about diet. Maybe they take not even a semester on diet. They have no idea the causes of disease. They're just trying to treat the symptoms with all their pills. And the psychiatrists, the symptoms, or anybody else in society that wants to make somebody happy, they're just treating the symptoms, trying to free one from distress temporarily. That's all they can do. Devotee is more intelligent, but people can't find intelligent people. They have to really search to find this knowledge. Of course, we're trying to make it much easier for people, but by and large, they have to really search, and then they have to get through the covering of the reputation that the devotees have also. Just like the parent of this devotee was saying that I know the Hare Krishnas, I read about them years ago. And they're like this and they're like that. It's very difficult for people to find Krishna consciousness. That's why Prabhupada's books are so important. And the chanting of the holy name is so important. And just getting out there wherever and whenever we can to give people a positive taste of spiritual life. Otherwise they can't find it. And everything else that they're finding is filled with illusion. They're being led in the wrong direction. So even you meet one person, it's the most valuable thing. And it gives a devotee such great satisfaction, just meeting one person. What to speak of meeting person after person after person. And this is how Krishna consciousness gets spread. Otherwise, people are in complete distress. Think about, most devotees come to Krishna consciousness. Why? Other than the prasadam. That wasn't the answer I was looking for. But why? Right. Relief from distress, right? Sometimes a devotee will come because they're so pious and they're looking for spiritual life. They're not in distress. They just want spiritual life. But for most of us, it's very difficult if we're enjoying material life. Difficult to take to Krishna consciousness. That's why in the heavenly planets it's difficult. Places where everyone is enjoying, like Hawaii, San Diego is like that also. Mahatma was explaining, although he's very successful there making brahmacharis, he was enthusiastic about when he was given the prospect of going to Berkeley. He said, life is too easy here in San Diego. Temple's right by the, have you been? Temple's right by the ocean, beautiful temple, beautiful ocean, fantastic weather. Everything's great. All the enjoyers go to Southern California, and you can feel that energy there. So, and as Prabhupada explains, even stalwarts in our line have fallen victim to the allurements of money and women. Money means sense gratification. Women means sense gratification. So when it's there, it bewilders one. and it's very difficult to come to Krishna consciousness. So, we come to Krishna consciousness because, very often, because we're in... The other things are there too. We're inquisitive, we want some knowledge, but basically what really gets us over that hump is the stress. So Krishna takes things away. We come to spiritual life. I forgot how I got on that point of distress. Yeah. And what did I say before that? Happens sometimes, senior moments. I get on a tangent and then I forget where I started from. These situations, they're very helpful for us. Because when we're in distress, then we're in a very sober state of mind. And from that sober state of mind, we can think clearly about Krishna consciousness. The material in it, I forgot where it was. I'm sorry. Right. Perhaps, the same thing happened with us. We didn't know where to turn, I remember feeling so much, thank you, Prabhu. I remember feeling so much distress that my parents sent me to a psychiatrist. And it was interesting. He was, asking me all these questions about my life. This is when I was like 19 or 20. And asked me all these, and then he came up with some theory about my father or this or that, or some weird thing that I couldn't relate to at all. And didn't help me, and he gave me some pills, and that was it. So people don't know, that's the point, thank you. People don't know where to turn. And many of us were in exactly the same situation. Brahmanda Brahmite Kona Bhagavan Jeev Guru Krishna Prasade Bhai Bhakti Lata Bija. Somehow or other, by Krishna's mercy, we came in contact with Srila Prabhupada, and somehow or other, by Prabhupada's purity and by the purity of the devotees and the purity of the message, we are attracted to Krishna consciousness. And we're so thankful, right? You remember who your Vartma Pradarshika Guru is? The first person you met as a devotee? First devotee that you met? We feel very grateful to them. Because by Krishna's arrangement, they're the ones who were instrumental in bringing us to Krishna consciousness. And it's really good to think about that. Think about where we were before we became devotees and where we would have been headed if we hadn't become devotees. We would have been in this forest of material enjoyment, not knowing how to deal with our distress, becoming intoxicated by life in so many different ways. We're in such an auspicious situation. And sometimes we get a little morose or upset about something. How the temple floor wasn't cleaned properly on Sunday, or somebody stole my dhoti, or so many things like that. And we blow these difficulties out of proportion because we're not remembering how fortunate we are to be here, to be devotees. Just like Prabhupada says, a devotee is awarded devotional service. It's an award. It's a great benediction to be able to do service, any service at all. And sometimes a devotee will leave the movement. I've seen this. Come back after some time, go to the temple and say, Prabhu, is there any service I can do? Anything at all, just anything at all. Clean the bathroom, sweep the floor, whatever, because they're realizing how valuable it was to be able to be engaged in devotional service. So we should never take it for granted. Sometimes we have too much service. Better to have too much service than no service or not enough. An idle mind is a devil's workshop. What to speak of not having the facility to associate with devotees or engage in service. And here, especially in the temple, we're in such a auspicious circumstance. So much facility for sadhana bhakti, association of devotees, so much service, so much preaching, so much going on all the time. We have every reason to be happy and really no reason to be sad or morose. So that's another point that we could take from this purport. That's actually this whole chapter that discusses the forest of material enjoyment. Sometimes people will say, well, it's a very pessimistic point of view. Very pessimistic. You read these verses and purports, very pessimistic. So I've been saying to people, we're not pessimistic, we're realistic. So that makes sense, or it made sense to me. And then today, because I was thinking of that, I looked up the word pessimistic. And this is what I found. Pessimism is a state of mind in which one anticipates undesirable outcomes or believes that the evil or hardships in life outweigh the good or the luxuries. So that's a very accurate statement about how we feel about the material world, right? So we are pessimistic about material life. So I'm going to have to change the way I respond to people when they say that. You people are so pessimistic. Yes, we are. Because we realize how miserable this material world is, and that's the definition of pessimism. And here's another one. Pessimistic means expecting the worst in this worst of all possible worlds. Exactly. Just like one item of knowledge is to be aware of the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease. That's in the 13th chapter, right? And in purport, Prabhupada explains that he talks about birth and death, and he said old age and disease we already have experience of, so no need to really talk about that. Of course, when you're young and healthy, you don't really. And just like so often when a devotee gets sick after being healthy a long time, boy, this world is horrible. It's like they had an aha moment, a realization that this world is horrible. It's like we didn't realize it before. Now we're sick. Oh man, this world is really horrible. What to speak of the threefold miseries that are always befalling us. So, yeah, we are pessimistic not about life. We're very optimistic about life. But we're pessimistic about material life because it leads to nowhere. It does lead to somewhere. It leads to hell. People are working their whole lives just so they can go to hell. I don't want to end the class on that note. So does anyone have a comment or a question? We have some time. We can get to know each other a little bit. What's on each other's minds? Yes, we will.
Speaking on the purport. My question is, what's something practical that we can keep in mind? I'm asking specifically for myself, but I think it would be helpful for everyone. That we see over and over in the little bit of scriptures I've read. The verse I can't remember, but Harinama, over and over. The only way in this age is to chant the holy names. And for me, it's a continuous aha process. There's a day or two that I don't do enough Harinam Sankirtan, and I'm trying trying, like, to do all the other angas the best that I can, but somehow or another I'm getting overtaken by my various anarthas and things. And then I'll be in the middle of kirtan and, oh, this is the medicine I needed. Thank you, Lord Chaitanya. And it's just a continual renewal process. So I was wondering, what's something practical we can do to remember that is the way to get relief in this day and age, and that is the medicine we all need. And
keep chanting. Just keep chanting. Nasta prayeshu abhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya. So every day, Prabhupada says. Every day, devotional service, reading, serving the spiritual master, serving the mission. Every day we have to do it. By doing that, then all the impurities become destroyed, almost to nil. In other words, we come up to the platform of nishta, steadiness in spiritual life. That means you don't forget. You're always engaged. You're always absorbed. But we can't give up the process because we're not on the spontaneous platform. We are on the spontaneous platform. Spontaneously attracted to Maya. Right? So we know what it means to be on the spontaneous platform. We have to change that now. But if we don't engage every day, all day, then Maya's right there. So that's how we remember. Of course, even during a kirtan you can forget, right? It's not like an automatic thing. We know that. Maya is very tricky, insidious, right? If you have a good singing voice, you'll be singing away during kirtan, right? But what are you thinking about if you're not careful? There was one brahmachari in San Diego. This is 1974. He wasn't very enthusiastic, but he was trying. Wasn't dancing at kirtan. Then all of a sudden he started dancing like anything. It's amazing how enthusiastic he was, dancing and dancing. A good dancer also. So then, during this time, he came up to me. He said, I'm attracted to this brahmacharini, and I find myself thinking about her all the time, even during kirtan. I said, is that why you're dancing so much like that? He said, yeah, actually it is. Trying to impress her. So, even during kirtan, we can become expert in engaging externally. And we see this sometimes also. A devotee is very fixed in the service, and then all of a sudden one day he's gone. This used to happen. Why? Because the mind is very, very tricky, very flickering, difficult to control. You can be chanting Hare Krishna, 16 rounds, be thinking about something completely different. We could be chanting and dancing in arti, we could be doing our service. That's why it's so nice to be speaking. Even when you're speaking also, your mind could be somewhere else. But when you're speaking, you really have to focus. Otherwise, you get up to give a class, you can't say anything. So at least you have to be focused on Krishna consciousness. That's why it's so purifying to preach. So this, and Prabhupada said, when he was explaining about the benefits of book distribution, at one point he said, book distribution is so important or helpful because you have to think about Krishna when you distribute a book. So the idea is to always be thinking about Krishna. So at least we need to engage the body, because we're engaging the senses, then we have a fighting chance to think about Krishna and keep our minds where they're supposed to be. But if we're not engaging in service, and the most powerful service is Shravanam Kirtanam, it's the basis of all our other service. So if we're not doing that, we don't have a chance. If we're doing that, we have an excellent chance of making advancement. And look how far we might be a little frustrated. Like you seem to be a little frustrated with your advancement. It's good. It's healthy. Of course, we shouldn't lament. Then you wind up incapacitated, just thinking about where you're not. So it's good that you're thinking like that. Anything else? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Maharaj. You were mentioning the wonderful and grateful position that we have coming to Krishna consciousness. Such a special opportunity and such a blissful, sublime process. But sometimes we may meet people, or we ourselves, despite coming to this process, sometimes people may have an attachment for the impersonal feature of God. So what would you say to someone if they're being exposed to Krishna consciousness but at the same time feeling somehow still attached to the impersonal feature of the Absolute?
Well, Krishna consciousness is so nice because it involves experiencing Krishna and the lifestyle of Krishna consciousness. Like Prabhupada says, I think it's in the Nectar of Devotion, that at first one experiences Krishna in the service. And so the experience is there. One feels the difference between serving Krishna and serving in other ways. And then there's the experience of the holy name, etc. So we want to give people a higher taste. If they have a higher taste, then it's easier for them to give up other things. And it's easier for them to be attracted to Krishna consciousness and Krishna as a person. But if they just remain on the intellectual platform, they can go back and forth, the mental platform is like that. They're just using their intelligence to try to understand. And there's so many arguments, especially if they've been conditioned in a certain way. Or just like the vegans. They won't even take milk even if it comes from protected cows. When they start tasting prasadam a little bit, then they sort of change somehow or other because they have an experience, a positive taste. So that's the most important thing, to give them a taste. Don't worry, if someone's attracted to Krishna consciousness, but has various doubts, so often Krishna consciousness is so powerful that the experience of it will mitigate one's doubts. Someone told me a story once, actually I read it when Bhakti Vikas Maharaj sent around some of his notes when he was writing the book. It was a story about Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Some man came to him, so many doubts. He said, well, first, if you can, they need some help in the Bajari area. If you can just help there. And he was doing service, and more service. And then when Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur had time to speak to him, the man came and said, actually, I don't have any more doubts. It's all been resolved by the service that I've been doing. And that happens. Or at least a person will be able to hear more submissively. If their doubts aren't automatically destroyed, a person will be able to hear more submissively. So sometimes you have to be patient with someone and just leave it there and help him concentrate on those aspects of Krishna consciousness that he's attracted to, that he likes. And the rest in due course of time can take care of itself. Are you referring to a certain person? Perhaps. Oh. Now sometimes, of course, we ask questions based on our personal experience, so sometimes it's good to know what the experience is in order to hone in a little more in a more detailed way on the question. Yes.
In the purport and in the verse, there's reference to a distressed person going to someone for help, but those persons cannot help because they don't have intelligence, and you're referring to it. So my question is, in cases when persons have, let's say, severe physical or mental distresses, would you recommend that they not go to doctors or persons like that?
I personally would recommend that they try to find someone qualified to help them at least get to the level where they can function a little more normally. Not that person needs to be capable of enlightening that person, but sometimes, just like there's certain diseases that we have, of the mental diseases that have to do with physiological impairments. It's a Kali Yuga disease. And for that, sometimes you need a Kali Yuga remedy, like you need to take a pill to get the synapses working properly again. So there's all sorts of help that we can take to get to the point of being able to function normally. I know a lot of devotees that are taking medication and have sought help for that, and they function normally now. So it depends on the specific instance. But I've recommended very often that a devotee seeks help because they can't function properly. What do you think?
I also think very similarly that there are individuals with certain skills, and they may not have the intelligence to help distinguish between body and soul.
Right.
But they have the material intelligence to get the machine working
right.
sufficiently so that others who have the intelligence, like the acharyas in the
right.
parampara, can awaken
right.
their higher intelligence.
Yeah, very nice.
I always hear in Krishna consciousness that the physical well-being follows spiritual, so it still seems like it's a symptomatic approach. I mean, I understand that, okay, you got to get the car running, but even if you get the car running, if the proper medicine isn't going on, the driver's going to die. So I just wonder if just going right to the driver immediately, if that's not the best thing to do. Like sit the person down and have them do Harinam Sankirtan for a really long time.
Well, it's not that you do one at the exclusion of the other. Sometimes both are necessary. Because a person, for example, I've seen people that are so distressed due to various types of conditioning that they've had, and very often, I wouldn't say very often, but it happens that a certain adjustment, you can call it a material adjustment, can help one focus more on Krishna consciousness. So it depends on the severity of the impairment and the cause of the impairment. I've seen it so many times. Just like there was this one devotee who was bipolar. And he, every once in a while he would tell me, that, sometimes I just feel like killing somebody. Then he'd be really enthusiastic, then he'd be miserable, couldn't take up any responsibility in Krishna consciousness. And he was also hypoglycemic. Made things even worse. So his blood sugar not enough blood sugar, and his mental, because of that, his physical and mental equilibrium was really impaired. So he undertook this treatment that took 3 months. I could explain the treatment later. It's very becoming more popular. And within 3 months, he was no longer hypoglycemic or bipolar. And he went on to do amazing service that he's still doing. He's one of the most valuable services in North America. And he took a treatment from someone who was not at all helping spiritually, just made some material adjustment. He's a changed person completely. All his relationships, people are taking shelter of him so many ways, just because of that one adjustment. Anything? Yes, Prabhu.
The things that helped me when I heard it, when I was thinking, how do I get into this? You know, how do I get into it when I was starting up in Krishna consciousness? And then I heard a number of times about enthusiasm and endeavor with intelligence, and I thought, oh, well, that sounds really helpful. So I think on the enthusiasm part, I was kind of able to move on that one. The intelligence part, I question myself a lot. So I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about enthusiasm and the endeavor, and especially the intelligence.
In other words, how can we keep it strong? The intelligence, in order to continue progressing in spiritual life. Yeah, Krishna explains at the end of the Bhagavad Gita that you worship him by your intelligence by reading the Bhagavad Gita. In other words, intelligence is the goal setter. We have to keep hearing. That's why we have class in the morning. In the morning, to become fixed. And if we're fixed, if our intelligence is strong, then even when the mind becomes strong, our intelligence can control it. But if the mind is strong and the intelligence is weak, we don't have a chance. We become overcome by the intelligence. That's why the association of devotees and revealing our minds to the other devotees is so important. Because they help us. If we can't help ourselves, they help us. If we can't help ourselves, Prabhupada's books help us. And it's so important to maintain our intelligence in Krishna's service. And if we can't, we have the devotees. Just like we were saying the other day, how important the devotee, and we were quoting a verse, a letter from Prabhupada when he was answering all these questions about Tulsi. One devotee was asking so many questions, and Prabhupada was answering one after the next, after the next, after the next. And then he got to the last question. He said, and regarding this, he said, use your common sense. And if you don't have any, ask someone that does. Do you know that letter, anybody? So, that's the value of being in association. Whatever we don't have, somebody does. And if we can work nicely in a team, then everybody's strengths are maximized. And we can do something wonderful like what you're doing here now. So much change, so much improvement since when was the last time I was here? 7-8 years ago, something like that. Yeah. So much improvement. So you're working together, you're protecting each other and serving the deity so nicely, and devotees and the whole city of Chicago. because you're capitalizing on each other's strengths. So we should always be willing to take shelter of the devotees, and they'll save us. Okay. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.